Okay, I see hands up now. Are these hands up to record or with questions?
Can I record too?
Yeah, was that Nick?
Yeah.
Okay.
Recording.
Esmeralda, you want to record also? Okay. Did I get everybody who wants to record? Okay, so let's look at red blood cells then. Are you trying to get red blood cells to the stroke volume or to the AVO2 difference?
For stroke volume.
Okay, so remember that if we're doing stroke volume, we're always going to look at the formula. So where would red blood cells fit in here? Under which one of these branches? Remember?
Under ETV.
Diastolic volume.
Yeah, so an increase in red blood cells, how will an increase in red blood cells cause an increase in end-diastolic volume?
Because there's an increase in plasma.
But the increase in red blood cells does not cause an increase in plasma.
Or a decrease in plasma, so there's
not a decrease in plasma.
damn it.
Increase in total blood volume.
Total blood volume. So the increase in red blood cells will cause an increase in total blood volume. So the more blood you have in your body, the more blood you put in your heart. So that's an increase in end-diastolic volume, stroke volume, cardiac output, VO2 difference. So when you have these 9 adaptations, they're separate adaptations. No adaptation will be in another adaptation's line, okay? Because the adaptations are not causing each other. Red blood cells are not affecting plasma. Capillaries are not affecting the mitochondria. Those are separate adaptations, so there shouldn't be an adaptation listed in another adaptation's sequence of events.
I have a question.
Mhm.
I thought it was there's an increase in plasma and red blood cells, which make up the total blood volume.
Yes, they're both contributing. So
Should we not
blood-
see it separately?
separately, red blood cells will increase total blood volume and cause something. An increase in plasma will also increase total blood volume, which will cause something, which is why there's a lot of overlap.
Okay.
But those are their own separate lines. The increase in plasma is not causing the increase in red blood cells. The increase in red blood cells is not causing the increase in plasma. So remember, when you're drawing these lines, these branches of the map, it's causative. This is causing this, is causing this, is causing this. So the adaptations are not causing each other. Did you do okay, Jasmine, on the red blood cells to AVO2 difference side?
For that one, yes, I put an increase in red blood cells increases oxygen delivery, which would increase O2 consumption and increase AVO2 difference.
Okay,
VO2
that's
max.
good. I would add a detail to that though. The increase in red blood cells gives you an increase in hemoglobin, which increases your oxygen carrying capacity. So you can carry more blood, you can carry more oxygen within your blood, which is going to increase delivery, uptake, and consumption. So I would add those details in there.
Which one was that one? And can you repeat that?
Red blood cells cause an increase in cause an increase in hemoglobin.
And then to O2 carrying.
Oxygen carrying capacity, delivery, uptake, consumption. Yeah, if you try to follow it out with the increase in hematocrit, it's not going to lead you to an increase in VO2 max.
And just to clarify, would it be inaccurate to say that I know we get the increase in total blood volume, but that it could split off from there to get to AVO2 difference and the increase in stroke volume?
You're talking about from what adaptation?
From red blood cell count. Like, I know that it's going to increase the total blood volume, but would it split off from there?
Well, it would cause an increase in total blood volume and would cause an increase in hemoglobin. So you couldn't draw a line from here to hemoglobin because an increase in total blood volume does not cause an increase in hemoglobin.
Okay.
An increase in total blood volume could cause an increase in blood flow to the muscle, which would be delivery, uptake, and consumption. So there's more than one branch from red blood cells to AVO2 difference, but the increased hemoglobin one is more important.
Okay.
So make sure that everything's causative. Okay, any other questions on any of those maps? PLF should be able to answer those questions as well, or I can in office hours, but I want to move on during class time. Okay. I don't know why this class doesn't get as many people coming to it. That's weird. Okay, so we did VO2 max. Now we're on lactate threshold. Rosie, can you please give me a definition for lactate threshold?
It's the point at which lactic acid begins to accumulate.
Good, as intensity increases. Okay, so how does a trained person's lactate threshold compare to an untrained person? Higher, lower, or the same?
So for a trained person, it would be lower because they are more trained and they use that threshold more. The untrained,
A trained person has a lower lactate threshold?
oh, they have a higher lactate threshold.
Yeah, we've already discussed that a trained person will have a higher lactate threshold.
Yeah.
So why, what adaptations, this is for everybody, Rosie, you don't have to answer. What would cause a trained person to have an increase in lactate threshold? Anyone can jump in and answer.
You'd have more bicarbonate buffer.
Does everybody agree with that?
I was gonna say less.
Less bicarbonate buffer?
Maybe not. Never mind.
What kind of training are we talking about here?
Endurance.
Endurance training.
So they
Endurance training causes an increase in your bicarbonate buffer?
Yeah, no, not in this case. I forgot doing aerobic
Right,
endurance.
so remember when we're filling out this table, we're specifically talking about endurance training. We'll get to anaerobic training in a few minutes. So does endurance training cause an increase in lactate threshold?
Yes.
Yes.
Olivia, how?
They have a higher aerobic capacity.
Good, can you explain?
With that, they have more hemoglobin. The capillaries are more dense. More myoglobin. And pass. I'm getting nervous.
Okay, who wants to finish that one?
Did we mention O2 enzymes?
Oxidative enzymes, myoglobin,
And more mitochondria.
mitochondria, and
Capillary density.
capillary density. Okay, so how do those adaptations affect your lactate threshold?
You're able to clear lactic acid faster.
Do those adaptations help you clear lactic acid?
It helps you produce less.
You produce less. It's the bicarbonate buffer that clears it. So these adaptations help you produce less lactic acid. So that's as far as we went with it on your midterm. Just being able to say that aerobic endurance training causes these 4 adaptations, which decrease lactic acid production. For the final, you need to take it a step further and explain how do those adaptations cause a decrease in lactic acid production. Does anybody want to try that? Eddie, go for it.
You can work out at higher intensities and it still be aerobic.
How to relate those adaptations?
Because you can use oxygen for longer.
Why?
Saying that right? Because there's more mitochondria and there's more things that bring the oxygen into the mitochondria. There's more enzymes that actually break down the oxygen, and there's more capillary density, so there's more delivery.
Okay, so we're not breaking down oxygen, right?
I mean, it's the end process where it like joins with the hydrogen to make water.
Consuming.
Right. So remember that the reason lactic acid production was increasing in the first place was because our mitochondria was overwhelmed. right? So the NADH had to drop its hydrogen off at the pyruvate, which reduces it into lactate, which was increasing lactic acid production. So as a result of endurance training, we're getting more mitochondria, and the mitochondria we have are getting bigger, okay? Therefore, it's like remodeling the entire women's bathroom at the Staples Center and adding a lot more stalls and adding more bathrooms. So now there's plenty of places to drop off the hydrogen in the electron transport chain, so we don't have to drop it off at pyruvate, so we don't have to produce more lactic acid. Therefore, this person can continue increasing their intensity, right? Or they can maintain a higher intensity. So it was the intensity that was speeding all this up, right? So the trained person can now work at a higher intensity and still stay aerobic because they're producing less lactic acid. Does that make sense? So you've got to be able to connect all those things and explain them now, okay? It's not just a list of words that you know. Endurance training, those 4 adaptations, and produce less lactic acid are things that you've memorized that go together. Now you need to fill it in with words to explain and connect them, okay? Okay. Do you understand why bicarbonate buffer does not go in this box for explaining why lactate threshold is higher? Because we're only talking about endurance training. Okay. Blood pH. Trained person and untrained person both jogging at 6 miles per hour. How does the trained person's blood pH compare to the untrained? Higher, lower, or the same?
Lower.
Okay, why lower? Do you have an explanation, Esme? It's just a guess. You have a 50-50 chance. Well, you have a 33% chance. Higher, lower, or the same?
I think it's higher
Why?
because you are producing less lactic acid, and so your blood wouldn't be as acidic. So
Right. So at the same intensity, the trained person is able to produce less lactic acid because they have more mitochondria. Right? So they produce less lactic acid at the same intensity. It's the lactic acid that decreases your blood pH. So a trained person will have a higher pH at the same intensity as the untrained person because they're producing less lactic acid. Red blood cell count. Trained person. Does endurance training affect your red blood cell count? I believe we have this listed as one of our 9 adaptations, an increase in red blood cells, right? So that should be an obvious increase. Endurance training increases your red blood cells, right? Which increases your hemoglobin, which increases your oxygen carrying capacity. We just talked about this 5 minutes ago. So you don't need an explanation for why. Okay, there's a protein you have that gets stimulated by endurance training. I'm not going to ask you about that. You don't need anything in the Y box for this. Just know that red blood cell production increases in response to chronic endurance training. Okay, and we have an explanation for how that affects our VO2 max. So what happens to a hematocrit? How does a trained person's hematocrit compare to an untrained person? Higher, lower, or the same?
Higher.
Okay, why is it higher?
Well, if your red blood cell count is going high, the formula for hematocrit is
Formed elements.
Formed elements divided by total blood volume.
And so formed elements are increasing.
Yeah.
But what's total blood volume doing?
Also increasing.
What's plasma doing?
It's also increasing.
yeah, so it stays the same.
Well, let's take a look. Let's think about it this way. If we have a vial of our blood, formed elements, just mainly red blood cells, plasma, and the hematocrit is the formed elements divided by total blood volume. Okay, so if red blood cells increase, well, red blood cells increase and plasma increases. Okay, we already know that. If red blood cells increase more than plasma, then we'd have an increase in hematocrit. If plasma and red blood cells increase the same amount, hematocrit would stay the same. If plasma increases more than red blood cells, hematocrit would go down. So which do you think is happening? which would be most beneficial for our performance?
Plasma.
The plasma increasing more so that hematocrit goes down.
Right.
Remember, when we were first talking about hematocrit, I said best case scenario is what actually happens with endurance training. You get an increase in red blood cells so that you have a higher oxygen carrying capacity, but you also get an increase in plasma so that hematocrit stays low. The problem with hematocrit going up is the blood increases its viscosity, gets thicker, and it decreases the blood flow because there's more resistance. So we want to have high levels of red blood cells, but we want to have low hematocrit. So that's what endurance training does for us. So hematocrit's going to end up going down even though we have an increase in red blood cells because the increases in plasma are larger. Okay, so a trained person has a lower hematocrit because increases in plasma are large.
Is it lower or decreases compared to the untrained?
It's lower.
Lower, okay.
Yes. The trained person has a lower hematocrit than an untrained person because of the large increases in plasma. And that's going to improve blood flow to the muscle, even though red blood cells are increasing. Everybody good with that? Okay, blood pressure. We spent some time on submax blood pressure with exercise. I'm not going to spend time on it with training. It's normal for blood pressure to increase during exercise. So a trained person's blood pressure, if they're both exercising at the same intensity, there's not going to be a difference in blood pressure between the trained person and the untrained person. Assuming the person had normal blood pressure to begin with, it's not going to be affected. If the person was hypertensive to begin with, it's possible that endurance training could reduce their blood pressure, but we're not going to go into that. We're just going to say if they had normal blood pressure to begin with, it's not going to be affected by exercise. Submax blood pressure won't be affected.
By exercise or by training?
Sorry, by training. Thank you. By training. Okay, last one is RER. I'm going to assume at this point you know what RER is and what it means. So trained person and untrained person both jogging at 6 miles per hour. How does the trained person's RER compare to the untrained person? Is it higher, lower, or the same? Svetlana, what do you think?
I want to say it stays the same or it's lower. Either one of those.
Nick, what do you think?
It decreases because we're working. It's easier to work aerobically, more aerobic.
Okay, so what does it mean to have a lower RER?
We're relying more on fat as a substrate, and we're using our type 1 fibers.
Right. So if you say a trained person and an untrained person both jogging at 6 miles per hour, if the trained person has a lower RER, that means they're relying more on fat. Is that true? Is that what a trained person should do? What should be able to do?
No.
Why not?
They should be able to use carbohydrates more efficiently. Right?
This drawing is going to come at you over and over and over and over again. Trained person has a higher lactate threshold, right? So if we pick an intensity, we pick any intensity that they're both exercising at. Let's say we pick this intensity. The trained person is underneath their lactate threshold. So they're working primarily aerobically. The untrained person is above their lactate threshold, meaning they're working primarily anaerobically. So the trained person is using primarily what substrate?
Fat.
Fat. The untrained person is using primarily what substrate?
Carbohydrates.
Okay, so how will the trained person's RER compare?
It's going to be
Lower.
It's going to be lower.
Lower.
The trained person can rely on fat at a higher intensity because they have a higher lactate threshold because they have more mitochondria, right? So all of these adaptations are affecting each other. Trained person can use more fat at a higher intensity because they have a higher lactate threshold, because they have more mitochondria. So they're not producing as much lactic acid. Everybody okay with that? Okay. So we finished this table, which means we're done with endurance training. We're going to move on to anaerobic high intensity interval training. We're still in chapter 11. Okay, chapter 11 is adaptations to training. So we started with endurance training, which is what's on this table. Now we're going to go into anaerobic training, and then the next chapter is resistance training. Okay, so we're specifically talking about high intensity interval training here, not resistance training. Okay, so when we were talking about endurance training, what was the best measure of our aerobic fitness?
VO2 max.
VO2 max. And how did we measure VO2 max?
Cardiac output times AVO2 difference.
Okay, but what's the test called that we measure? What's the technique for measuring it called?
Indirect calorimetry. Indirect
calorimetry was the test we used to measure your VO2 max, right? You have the mask on, it's measuring your oxygen consumption and your carbon dioxide production, and you're going to increase your intensity. You're going to measure that gas exchange, and it's going to tell you what your VO2 max is. Okay, so for anaerobic fitness, we have a different test. For anaerobic fitness, it's called the Wingate test. Back when I taught the labs a million years ago, we used to do the Wingate test in the labs. They don't do it anymore, so let me explain to you how it works. So the Wingate test is on a cycle ergometer. You're gonna get on the bike and you're gonna start pedaling against no resistance. You're gonna start pedaling as fast as you can. And then we're gonna drop a load on the bike and start the clock, okay? The load is based on your body weight and it's heavy. And when I say drop the load on the bike, I mean literally drop the load on the bike. It's not a knob that we're turning, that's a gradual increase. There's a flywheel that has a strap on it. And we literally, there's a hook on the end of the strap, there's a basket, and we put weights in the basket, and we literally drop it on the flywheel. So it's immediate, okay? And it's heavy. So you're spinning against no resistance, really fast with your legs. We drop the load, we start the timer. You have to pedal as fast as you can against this heavy resistance for 30 seconds. Okay, it's a 30-second all-out test. It's incredibly intense. A lot of people at the end of this test will throw up, which is probably why we don't do it in the 346 lab anymore. I think they do it in the 446 lab, but they don't have everybody do it. They just like take a couple of volunteers and have a couple of people do it. So think about whether or not you want to try that. It's a very intense test. So imagine yourself on a stationary bike, spinning your legs fast against no resistance, drop a heavy resistance. You're not gonna be able to speed up, right? You're gonna try to maintain your speed for 30 seconds. So this is 30-second test. Within that 30 seconds, where do you think you're going the fastest? The beginning, the middle, or the end?
Beginning.
Beginning. Why the beginning?
Because you have no weight.
Because we have no... Why is your fastest speed happening in the first 10 seconds of this test?
We're using the ATP PCR system.
Exactly. This is a maximal effort against a very heavy resistance. So you're in your ATP PCR system, and which fibers are you using?
Type 2X.
2X fibers. So you're gonna have your most explosive performance in the first 10 seconds of this test. Okay? After that, this system is gonna be depleted. And so you're gonna have to shift into your 2A fibers, and you're gonna have to shift into glycolysis. So you're gonna slow down, okay? And you're gonna start massively producing and accumulating lactic acid, which means by about the 15-second mark, your legs are on fire. And you've got another 15 seconds to go, as hard as you can. So this is an incredibly intense test, okay? So you hit your peak power in that first 10 seconds. Your peak power is your highest power output. in the test. It happens within the first 10 seconds, and you should be able to explain to me why. Your average power over the entire 30 seconds, we call your mean power, and that is the measurement we use for your anaerobic fitness. Your anaerobic capacity is your mean power, which is your average power output over this 30-second test. Okay, any questions on how that test works? That's all you need to know about how it works. Okay with that? So, do you think it's possible through training to improve your performance on this test? The way that endurance training would increase your VO2 max? Do you think high intensity interval training can increase your power production? It can, peak and mean. If you increase your peak power, you'll increase your mean power, right? So we have two anaerobic systems. What are they?
The ATP, PCR, and glycolysis.
Okay, so we're gonna go through each of those systems, talk about how you train it, and then what adaptations you can expect to see from training that system, and then how that will affect your performance on the Wingate test. Okay, so I'm going to start with the ATP PCR system. Quick review here, and I need you guys to jump in with these answers so we can just keep it going, because I can't see you if you raise your hand right now. Where does this occur?
Glycoplasm,
Okay, substrate?
carbohydrates,
Nope, there's no carbohydrates in this system.
Phosphocreatine.
PCR is the substrate. Rate limiting enzyme.
protein kinase,
Okay. How long can you stay in this system?
10 to 15.
About 10 to 15 seconds. And how long does it take to recover from the system?
5 minutes.
3 to 5 minutes. Okay. So give me an example of an exercise you could do that would be in this system.
100-meter sprint.
Okay. So 100-meter sprint takes about how long?
10 to 15 seconds.
10 to 15 seconds. Perfect. So if you're going to work out in the system, does this mean you're going to go out to the track, you're going to warm up, you're going to run 100-meter sprint, and then you're going to go home and you're done with your workout, or are you going to do repeats?
Repeat.
Okay. So we're going to do repeats. How long are we going to rest in between?
3 to 5 minutes.
3 to 5 minutes, so that we can stay in the system. Okay. If you rest shorter than that, then all the subsequent sprints will be in glycolysis. There's nothing wrong with that, except right now we're trying to stay in the ATP PCR system. Okay, so if you want to stay in the ATP PCR system, you have to give rest long enough to replenish the PCR so that the subsequent sprint can be in the PCR system, in the ATP PCR system. Okay, so what that's going to look like then, if you're training somebody for this, client hires you and you decide you want to train them in the system for some reason, you take them out to the track, you have them do a warm up, you have them do the sprint, let's just call it a 10-second sprint. You have them do a 10-second sprint, you chat with them for 3 minutes, you have them do another 10-second sprint, they're scrolling through Instagram for 3 minutes, you have them do another 10-second sprint, they're sitting and picking at the grass for 3 minutes, okay? At the end of this, let's say they paid you, I don't know, $75 for that workout. They're not going to be real happy because they spent a lot more time resting than they did exercising. So they're not going to be thrilled with this. Okay, but that's how you have to structure it if you want to stay in that system. Okay, a couple more things here before I move on. Let me ask you this. If you do one 10-second sprint, all out as fast as you can, will you be out of breath after it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Why?
Because your oxygen consumption was less. No, yeah. Than the oxygen required. You're not, if you're doing like a 10-second sprint, you're not essentially breathing as much as you would if you'd be doing probably like a lap or 2 around the track.
That's a reasonable argument. What would cause you to be out of breath?
Oxygen deficit?
Give me a physiological cause. we talked about two things that increase your breathing rate.
Does it have to do with the ventilatory threshold?
CO2, yeah, from bicarbonate buffer. When
The CO2 from the bicarbonate buffer is one thing that causes your ventilatory rate to increase, right? So what's causing that CO2 from the bicarbonate buffer? Why is that being produced?
lactic threshold is reached.
Because you're producing lactic acid, right? Which makes the bicarbonate buffer work, which creates the carbon dioxide, which triggers the inspiratory centers in your brain to increase your breathing rate, which is out of breath, okay? Are you producing lactic acid in that 10-second sprint?
Yes.
I
You're
guess
doing one 10-second sprint. Are you producing lactic acid?
Maybe not the first one, but
Are you accumulating lactic acid? Let's say that, because we're pretty much always producing it. Are you accumulating lactic acid during that one 10-second sprint?
Yes.
What system are you in during this 10-second sprint?
AT-PCR.
Is lactic acid a byproduct of the ATP-PCR system?
No.
So that 10-second sprint is not going to cause lactic acid, bicarbonate buffer, carbon dioxide, breathlessness. The other thing we said causes increase in your ventilation rate is epinephrine. Okay, in that 10-second sprint, there's not much of a release of epinephrine. Okay, so there's nothing happening to cause you to be out of breath at the end of a 10-second sprint if you're in the ATP-PCR system. There's no breathlessness there. Try it. Next time you get a chance, warm yourself up, do an all-out 10-second sprint. Should not be out of breath after it.
Is this just for a trained person? Like, would an untrained person doing a sprint be out of breath?
Not on their first sprint, but
Okay.
if you do sprint repeats, if you don't do full recovery, here's the thing. Let's say you're training this person, you're trying to stay in the ATP-PCR system. You have them do the 10-second sprint. You give them 3 minutes rest, and you have them do another 10-second sprint. They're out of breath after the second one. What does that tell you?
They weren't, they hadn't recovered enough.
They hadn't fully recovered. So they need more than 3 minutes recovery in between. Okay, 3 to 5 minutes is an average range. Some people can recover in 3 minutes, some people need 4, some people need 5, some people need 7. 3 to 5 is an average. So if you give them 3 minutes rest and they're out of breath after the next one, that means they're in glycolysis, which means their ATP PCR system was not fully recovered. So you need to give them longer rest before the next one. Okay, also, if you give them, if you're doing it by distance, so let's say you're giving them a 100-meter sprint. The first time it takes them 12 seconds, you rest 3 minutes. Second time it takes them 14 seconds. What does that tell you?
They didn't rest enough.
They didn't fully recover. If you fully recover, you should be able to hit your top speed on every rep. If your performance is decreasing, it's because you didn't fully recover the system. And so now you're sprinting in glycolysis with your 2A fibers, you're not going to go as fast. Okay, so understanding physiology is going to help you adjust the training to be where you want to be in the system you want to be in. Okay, so you have to notice if the performance is decreasing, assuming there's not a motivation factor. Okay, because motivation can also be a factor affecting their sprint. That's not going to affect their breathlessness, but it could affect their speed, right? So assuming motivation's not an issue, if you're fully recovered, you should be able to maintain your top speed in every sprint. Okay, and we'll talk about this again when we get to resistance training, because that'll affect how long you rest in between your sets in resistance training as well. Okay, if you want to stay in the ATP-PCR system, you have to structure it a certain way, and you have to know what to look for to make sure that person is in that system. Everybody okay with that? Okay, so let's look at adaptations if you train that way. Adaptations to training in this system will be hypertrophy. Okay, you're training primarily your 2X fibers. When you challenge those fibers, when you overload those fibers, they respond with hypertrophy. That means the muscle is going to get larger, thicker, more dense, we're going to assume for now that that's an increase in actin and myosin filaments. Okay, when we get to the resistance training chapter, we'll talk a little bit more detail about what's happening during hypertrophy. Let's assume it's actin and myosin filaments. Therefore, you're going to be able to produce more force as a result of this hypertrophy. Muscles getting thicker, denser, stronger. Okay, so hypertrophy is the primary adaptation. Secondary to that, we'll say we have increased strength. With that increase in strength, you'll get an increase in speed. Okay, because you can produce more force, so you can propel yourself forward faster. Will this affect your performance on the Wingate test? Will this affect your power? What do you think? It will. Power is basically force over time, right? So if you can produce more force in less time, that's going to be power. Okay, so we're also going to get, with that hypertrophy, increased strength, increased speed, and increased power, which is going to improve your performance on the Wingate test. It'll increase your peak power, which will increase your mean power. Okay, in most cases, especially with beginners, an increase in strength will cross over into an increase in power. There are ways to train specifically for power. An increase in strength does not always mean an increase in power, and you get more detail into that in 446. But for us, we're going to say an increase in strength will lead to an increase in power. Okay, and that's it for that system. We're not getting any enzymatic adaptations. Is it going to affect your bicarbonate buffer?
No.
Do you use your bicarbonate buffer in the system?
No.
No, so you're not going to affect your bicarbonate buffer in the system because you're not using it. Remember, you're only going to get adaptations in the pathways you're using. Okay, so that's it for the system.
For the ATP PCR system, you also have, you're not supposed to be like breathless.
Nope, there's nothing in that system causing breathlessness.
Can you repeat the epinephrine? You were saying that no epinephrine is released or minimal?
Very, very little epinephrine is released in a 10-second sprint. Yeah, so would a person who trains in this system be able to stay in this system longer than the 10 to 15 seconds? Is that what training does for you in the system?
No.
No. That 10 to 15 seconds applies to everybody, trained or untrained. Okay, if training in the system made you able to stay in this system longer, Usain Bolt would be competing in the mile. Because I would say Usain Bolt probably trains in the system quite a bit, right? It's the best 100-meter, 200-meter sprinter in the world. So if training the system makes you able to stay in the system longer, he'd be able to keep that speed through the 400, through the 800, through the 1600. But you can't. Okay, even Usain Bolt cannot stay in the system longer. What he can do is produce more force, produce more power than anybody else during his 10 seconds in this system. Does that make sense? Okay. Glycolysis, a little more complicated as usual. Let's do a quick review of glycolysis. Where does it occur?
In the sarcoplasm.
Plasm.
Yes. Primary substrate.
Carbohydrates.
Rate limiting enzyme?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Good. We talked about how long you can stay in the system, but we said there's a wide range depending on how far above your lactate threshold you are, right? If you're just barely above your lactate threshold, you can stay there probably for a few minutes. If you're way above your lactate threshold, it's going to be 15 seconds, okay? And anything in between, depending on how high your intensity is. Okay, so give me an example of an activity you could do that would be in this system. I need you guys to yell some things out. I need a bunch of them.
A mile run?
Okay.
Would the like 10-second sprints with less than 3-minute resting time.
Yep, do that. Okay, what else? How do you know if an activity is in the system?
You're out of breath.
Makes you out of breath and your muscles are burning. Okay, so give me some other examples.
Would a marathon
Swimming?
count?
Marathon would not make you out of breath. Marathon is aerobic.
Will
400
swimming
meter sprint?
count?
What is it?
400
Burpee.
meter
Swim?
sprint?
Burpees
Oh, that's a fun one.
For time or reps?
for time.
How long?
I don't know.
30 seconds.
Yeah, 30 seconds, as many as possible.
Okay,
What about squat jumps that we did in class?
squat jumps.
Swimming, 100
Wait,
yards.
hold on, with the squat
Swimming,
jump. Hold on, with the squat jumps, time or reps?
Time,
How long?
30 to 40 seconds.
Okay, let's say 30 seconds. Okay, what else?
the butterfly swimming,
Butterfly. Distance or time?
Time,
How long?
maybe a minute.
yeah.
Okay, give me one more exercise.
400 meter sprint?
Okay, we already have a sprint. Can you give me something else?
Jump rope.
Okay. Some people can jump rope for a really long time.
How about like double unders?
Okay. Everybody know what double unders are?
Like
It's
you go twice.
Jump the rope, but you go in twice. You go around twice with the rope for every jump. Really hard. Okay, reps or time?
Probably time.
Okay, how long?
I'd say 30 seconds.
Okay. So you guys have just written your workout for the day. You got to do this workout today.
Oh, crap.
You got to do a mile run as fast as you can. Okay, because if you do an easy mile run, it's aerobic. So this has got to be a mile at your fastest pace. As soon as you finish the mile, you have a 10-second sprint. Then you go immediately into 30-second burpees, immediately into 30 seconds of squat jumps. Then you got to jump in the pool and swim butterfly for a minute. Then you got to jump out of the pool, grab your rope, and do 30 seconds of double unders. Is everybody okay with this? Or would you like to make some adjustments?
Is 911 on the phone ready for me?
Oh,
What adjustments do you want to make?
Rest time in between.
Okay, that's a great idea. So here's the thing, when people are writing high intensity interval workouts, they usually think the harder the better, right? And the less rest, the better. So I'm gonna do hard exercise, hard exercise, hard exercise, hard exercise, hard exercise with no rest. The problem with that is it's not physiologically possible. And it's also not intervals, right? High intensity, high intensity, high intensity, high intensity. What's gonna happen is these sprints are probably going to be really slow. This sprint is probably going to be really slow. These burpees are going to be ugly. You're going to maybe get 3 burpees done here because you're so exhausted from the run and the sprint. Okay, so that's no longer going to be anaerobic. Okay, if you don't allow rest, the intensity of the work interval is going to have to come down because you cannot stay. If this is a 10-minute, 15-minute workout, you cannot stay above your lactate threshold that long. It's not physiologically possible, and you should be able to explain to me why. So if you want to work at a high intensity, it has to be done with rest, and that's what makes it interval. Work, rest, work, rest, work, rest. Okay, so in this workout, where do you want to put rest?
After each one.
Okay. How long rest after the mile run?
3 to 5 minutes. Oh, wait. Never mind. Disregard.
I would say about a minute, maybe.
Okay. And another rest after the sprint?
Yeah, but I
30
would say,
seconds.
I think
Wait 3 minutes after that sprint to go into burpees.
This is a 10-second sprint.
well, I remember when before the second exam, you gave us the sprints, like 10-second sprints, and then between those 10-second sprints have 30-second rest time, and that's going into glycolysis.
Right. We're not trying to be an ATP PCR right now, right? We're trying to be in
Oh,
glycolysis.
right.
So how long do we want this rest?
30 seconds.
Okay. When's the next rest?
After squats jump.
Okay, so we're gonna do burpees and then squat jumps and then rest. This is a collaboration, guys. Feel free to jump in. How long is the rest here?
Maybe a minute or
Maybe,
two.
Seconds.
yeah,
60 seconds? Okay,
sure.
when's the next rest?
After the swim.
After the swim.
Okay, how long?
A long time.
A
A
minute.
minute?
A minute.
Okay, and then, by the way, we've got to repeat this 3 times.
Professor Fleck, I
Yeah.
feel like from what I've done regarding like interval training, whatever, shouldn't have like all the times have been. Wait, shut up. Shouldn't all the times be like the same? Like, for example, the 10-second sprint and the burpee, shouldn't that be like 20 seconds or something like that?
Why?
I don't know. So that way you can have the same amount of rest in between each like activity, I guess, or exercise. But the
Okay,
only
so
thing that's screwing me up is like the mile run, because the mile run would be like 7 minutes or something like that.
Okay, so yes, there are a bunch of different things going on here that have to be considered when putting up together a workout like this. The structure is one of them, and that's what we're getting to. So first I wanted to throw out this workout, and then I want to make some adjustments to it.
Okay.
Okay, so we're getting there. Do we want another rest after these double unders before we start over, and how long is the rest?
3 minutes?
No.
Ish.
3 minutes?
I would put a minute.
1 minute?
I would make it longer.
How long, guys?
Maybe 2 minutes.
Okay, so you're gonna do a mile run as fast as you can. You're gonna rest for a minute. You're gonna do one 10-second sprint. You're gonna rest for 30 seconds. You have 30 seconds of burpees immediately followed by 30 seconds of squat jumps. You get a minute off. You're gonna jump in the pool, do a 60-second butterfly. You're gonna have 60 seconds of rest. You're gonna do 30 seconds of double unders, and you have a 2-minute rest, and then you're gonna start over. Is everybody okay with this? Or do you want to make some adjustments?
Wait, why was there no rest between burpees and jump squats?
That's what
Yeah,
was, I'm just doing what I'm told.
Mm-hmm.
You wanna add a rest in here?
That'd be nice.
I
Okay.
think so. Burpees are full body, so I would say yeah.
How long?
30 seconds.
At least 30 seconds, yeah.
Okay, so this is your workout. Write it down. You got to do this. Find a pool. I wish I could find a pool. Okay, so a few things we need to discuss here. The first one is what Caroline brought up regarding the structure. Okay, so one thing to think about when you put together a workout like this is it's helpful to have some kind of structure. Okay, structure doesn't mean that all the work and rest intervals have to be the same, but there should be some kind of pattern. So right now we have 1 minute on, we have about 7 minutes on, a minute off, 10 seconds on, 30 seconds off, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, 30 seconds on, 60 seconds off. 60, do you see there's no pattern here? So have you ever done a workout that seemed like it dragged on for 3 hours and then did another workout that seemed like, oh, that went by really fast? Part of that has to do with the structure, because if there's a structure to it, you can wrap your mind around that, and it gives you a pattern to kind of dig into, and you kind of know what to anticipate, and it makes the workout just feel better. Like, people won't be able to explain to you why it feels better or why it went faster, but it has a lot to do with the structure. If there's no structure and everything's random, it makes the workout drag on and feel uncomfortable. So that's not really a physiological issue, because there's nothing wrong with having it that way physiologically. Just if you're setting up a workout, it makes sense to have a structure. Okay, so that doesn't mean that the work to rest ratio always has to be the same. It could be something, for example, like a pyramid structure. You could do an exercise for 15 seconds on and then take 30 seconds rest, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds rest, 45 seconds on, 30 seconds rest, a minute on, 30 seconds rest, okay? And then you can go down the pyramid doing the same thing, okay? So this is a pattern, it's a structure. You can do the ascending side only, you can do the descending side only, you can do the ascending side and the descending side. These could be all the same exercises, these could be all different exercises, but I've built in some kind of structure that you can dig your teeth into. Does that make sense? It can be, gosh, any kind of structure. You could do, and that was an ascending and descending pyramid. It could be always, it could go by reps. Like, it doesn't have to always be time. It can be reps. You can do a pyramid with the reps. You can make any kind of scheme, okay? But the point is, if you're training someone several times a week, you don't have to always come up with mind-blowing different exercises, especially like right now when we're training people. I don't know if you guys have been training people. You're training people online, they don't have equipment, it's difficult to come up with exercises to do. You don't have to come up with mind-blowing new exercises every time you train someone. You can change the structure, and it's gonna feel like a completely different workout. It's gonna activate different things depending on how you structure it. Let me get into a little bit more detail on that. So here we need to put in some kind of structure, some kind of consistency. But another thing to look at is the exercise choices. So I know we were just having different people throw things in, and that's fine. But another thing you want to think about when you're putting together a workout like this is what exercises you want back to back, and what exercise you want to group together. Because we have a rest in between each exercise. You don't have to have a rest in between each exercise. You can superset some exercises and then rest after those. So you could superset together exercises that work opposing muscles, so that one muscle is resting while the other one's working, and then superset those together. You can put exercises together that activate the same muscles or similar muscles back to back. That's going to cause a lot more fatigue in those muscles. That's okay. You can put those together and then rest. Sometimes, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll put a lower body exercise, an upper body exercise, and a cardio exercise blocked together, rest, repeat those, and then change the exercises. Okay? But you have to put some thought into which exercises are back to back, because that's going to affect you. If you're doing 3 pushing exercises in a row, that's going to feel completely different than if you do a pushing exercise, a pulling exercise, and a core exercise, or a pushing exercise, a pulling exercise, and a cardio exercise. Okay? One way to do it is not wrong. You just have to think about how that's going to affect the person that's doing it. Okay? Looking back at this, we have 30 seconds rest, 30 seconds rest, 60 seconds. What if I changed all these to 10 seconds rest? Put 10 seconds rest, 10 seconds rest, 10 seconds rest, 10 seconds rest. Will we still be in glycolysis?
Yes.
Yeah. Can I do that? How will that change the workout?
It's going to go faster.
Performance will decrease as well.
Performance will decrease, right? So the less rest I give you, the more fatigue you're going to feel, the less effort you'll be able to put into the next work interval, right? So I can give you longer rest. So if I instead make these all 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, are we still in glycolysis? For the most part, yes. How long does it take to recover from this? How long is full recovery?
Couple of minutes.
If you drop your pH down to intolerable levels, which if you're doing your work interval right, you should, how long does it take to go back to normal pH?
I think you said 35.
30 to 35 minutes. So whether you're resting 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, you're not going to be fully recovered, no matter what, unless you're going to sit for 30 minutes or walk around for 30 minutes in between each interval, which you're not going to do. Okay, so none of this is giving you full recovery. But the longer the recovery you take, the harder you'll be able to work in the next work interval. The shorter the recovery you take, the more you're going to fatigue. Okay, one of those ways is not better than the other, but they're different. They're going to feel completely different. Okay, so you could take this workout, write down this workout, do it today with 2 minutes of rest in between each exercise. Do it tomorrow with 10 seconds rest in between each exercise. It's going to feel like a completely different workout. They're both in glycolysis. Okay, the difference is mechanical fatigue versus metabolic fatigue. Okay, if you rest long enough that you can work really hard during the work interval, most of the fatigue you're getting is going to be mechanical fatigue. If you are hardly resting at all and each subsequent effort is getting harder and harder and harder, now you're looking at metabolic fatigue. They activate different pathways. Okay, and that's something you go into in more detail in 446, especially if you take Dr. Nicole. He goes in detail into those different pathways that are activated and what happens as a result of that. Okay, they're both valid pathways. So it's good to train both ways. Sometimes you take a longer recovery, sometimes you take a shorter recovery. But if you're training another person or training yourself, you need to have a physiological understanding of what to expect. You can't expect the same level of performance in every work interval if you're not giving enough rest. If you're giving it purposely a short rest, you have to expect that the work output is going to gradually go down as fatigue, as lactic acid accumulates, right? The more rest you get, the more reasonable it is to expect a high level of effort on every interval. Both structures will give you results. Does that make sense? So there's not a perfect work to rest ratio. Sometimes you want the rest long, sometimes you want the rest short. You're going to activate different pathways. The more pathways you activate in general, the better, unless you're an elite athlete trying to train a certain thing. For the average person, it's better to mix it up, try different things. Any questions on how to put a workout like this together, what things to think about?
Yes, when would you want to actually like do like we're doing here with different rest intervals throughout the workout?
I wouldn't do that unless I was building some kind of structure.
Oh, okay.
And then, like what I do when I build a workout like this is I will decide on my structure first. I don't decide on my exercises first and then come up with a structure. I come up with a structure first and then fill in the exercises. So for example, if I know I want to do a 15-second work interval, followed by a 30-second work interval, followed by a 45-second work interval, followed by a 60-second work interval, and I'm doing different exercises, I'm going to pick a different exercise for that 15-second work interval than I would for the 60-second work interval. Right? I'm going to pick something harder for the 15 seconds because I want you to be exhausted in that 15 seconds. So I can do a harder exercise in a 15-second interval than I can in a 60-second interval. So I'm going to pick an exercise that's challenging in that work interval, and I'm going to structure it that way and then determine how much rest I want in between based on whether I want you working hard, your hardest in each interval, or if I want you completely fatigued. Have you guys heard of Tabata? Tabata is an interval structure. Tabata is an interval structure that's 20 seconds on, full all-out effort, 10 seconds off, repeated 8 times in a row. Same exercise. It's incredibly difficult because 10 seconds is basically no rest. So each subsequent round gets harder and harder and harder. It's like putting an extra rock in your backpack every time you do it. Okay, so if you're doing push-ups, for example, by the time you get to maybe in round 1, you're getting 20 push-ups in 20 seconds. By round 4, you're maybe getting 15. By round 8, you're maybe getting 10. So each subsequent round gets harder and harder and harder because there's very little recovery. Okay, research has shown incredible results from training that way. And that's what I was talking about when I mentioned metabolic training. So very, very, very high intensity interval training, create those huge deficits, makes the epoch last 24, 48 hours after. Okay, huge results from training that way. But you have to expect that the work output is going to go down for every subsequent round. Whereas if you give more rest, you can get more work done in each round. Both are good. Okay, adaptations, if you train this way. Hypertrophy. Muscles will get bigger and stronger. Secondary to hypertrophy would be increased what?
Strength.
Strength. Speed. And power goes along with that hypertrophy. Will this affect your performance on the Wingate test?
Yeah, no, you would increase.
Yeah, you can produce more force. Generally, you can create more speed and more power, increase peak power, increase mean power on the Wingate test. Okay, additional adaptations in this system would be increased carbonate buffer. Right, high intensity interval training uses your bicarbonate buffer, therefore that pathway will become more efficient. You'll create more bicarbonate buffer. Since we mentioned the bicarbonate buffer, we need to write it out. How do we write out the bicarbonate buffer?
Yeah, HCO3.
HCO3 is the bicarbonate buffer itself, and what does it do?
Plus hydrogen.
Picks up the hydrogen from
Lactic acid.
lactic acid and becomes
H2CO3.
Which is
Carbonic acid.
which then becomes
H2O
and CO2.
plus CO2.
Okay. Carbon dioxide will trigger the inspiratory centers in your brain, cause you to be out of breath. So you'll be out of breath during this workout. Okay. What's secondary to that increased bicarbonate buffer?
pH.
What does increased bicarbonate buffer do for you? Increases your
Lactate threshold.
lactate threshold, right? So lactate threshold is not, we're not considering that a primary adaptation. We're saying that the increased bicarbonate buffer is the primary adaptation, which will secondarily cause an increase in lactate threshold. Okay, another adaptation to this type of training is increased glycolytic enzymes. Name some glycolytic enzymes.
PFK.
PFK would be the main one. What else could we include here? On the way in and on the way out.
Hexokinase.
Hexokinase.
Glycogen phosphorylase.
We could include glycogen phosphorylase. How about between pyruvate and lactic acid?
Lactate dehydrogenase.
Lactate dehydrogenase. So this type of training will give you more of those enzymes, which is going to make this process more efficient, meaning you're going to be able to produce ATP faster. Okay, so these adaptations you get from training in glycolysis, how does this compare to the adaptations from training in the ATP PCR system?
To hypertrophy.
ATP PCR system, its primary adaptation is just hypertrophy with increased strength, speed, and power. And then with glycolysis, not only do you have hypertrophy, but you also have increased bicarbonate buffer and glycolytic enzymes.
Right. This adaptation that you get from the PCR system, you also get in glycolysis, plus additional adaptations, which means there's really no reason to train specifically in the ATP PCR system. There's really no benefit to that. You can get the same adaptations plus more by working in glycolysis, plus it's more fun and more interesting than sitting for 3 to 5 minutes in between each 10-second interval, right? So your client will be much happier. There's not really a reason to train in the ATP PCR system unless you are training a competitive athlete whose event is in that system, in which case you should do some training in that system, but also training in glycolysis so you get the additional adaptations. But for an average person, there's no reason to set it up that way. Okay, questions on that? Okay, so both types, training in either system will improve your performance on the Wingate test. Okay, let me ask you this. Let's look at performance on a 10-second sprint. Will training in the ATP PCR system affect your performance on a 10-second sprint?
If you're only doing one 10-second sprint, your performance is going to be better than if you were doing it in glycolysis.
Okay, so my event is a 10-second sprint. Okay, let's say I compete in a 10-second sprint, 100-meter sprint, whatever you want to call it. Okay, I'm just going to say 10-second sprint. If I train in the ATP PCR system, will that improve my performance on my 100-meter sprint? Why? London, go ahead. You got to unmute yourself.
I was talking to myself, but I was saying that your body would have adapted to that type of workout, and it would just be easy for you just to.
Okay, let's talk physiology. What's the adaptation you're referring to?
The hypertrophy.
Hypertrophy. Okay, so this type of training has given you hypertrophy. How will that hypertrophy improve your performance on the 100-meter sprint?
Well, it will give you your
What are the secondary adaptations to the hypertrophy?
Increased strength, increased power, increased speed.
Speed. Isn't that what you need to improve your performance on the 100-meter sprint?
Yes.
Strength, speed, and power.
Yes.
Okay. If you do glycolysis training, will that improve your 100-meter sprint?
Yes, I would say yes.
Why?
Because you're using using hypertrophy and the speed, strength, and power. Plus, you have these 2 adaptations: the bicarbonate buffer and the increased glycolytic enzymes.
Okay, this question is for everybody. Will the increased bicarbonate buffer contribute to the improvements in the 100-meter sprint?
No.
It won't affect it at all.
Why?
Because you'll
never reach lactic threshold for it to affect it.
You're not going to reach lactate threshold in your 10-second sprint, in your 100-meter sprint? You're
Accumulate.
sprinting underneath your lactate threshold? We talked about this in office hours.
You said it's under 10 seconds, right? Or it's a 10-second sprint?
Not a 10-second sprint.
Yeah, so you don't reach it.
10 seconds is just ATP
You
PCR.
don't.
Okay, so my question is, we're training in glycolysis. My question is, does the increase in bicarbonate buffer contribute to the improvements in your 100-meter sprint?
It doesn't.
Why not?
Because
well, you're not producing enough lactate.
It's anaerobic. You're in your PCR system. You're relying on phosphocreatine. You're not accumulating bicarbonate buffer.
Accumulating bicarbonate.
I'm sorry, you're not accumulating the lactic acid.
Okay.
Well, the increase in bicarbonate buffer would let you run longer, but not necessarily run better.
Sprint longer at your top speed?
Well, it wouldn't be your top speed, but like within glycolysis, like as hard as you can go, that has more to do with the hypertrophy, whereas the bicarbonate buffer really just has more to do with you staying in glycolysis longer.
Okay, so my question is, my event is the 100-meter sprint. I've been training in glycolysis. We already established that the hypertrophy I'm gonna get from that is gonna improve my speed and performance on the 100-meter sprint. Now I wanna know if the bicarbonate buffer is also contributing or not.
It is not.
No.
Can you explain why?
Because
you won't even use it during those 10 seconds.
What do you mean you won't use your lactate threshold?
You won't reach your lactate threshold, so the bicarbonate buffer won't build up. You won't be out of breath.
Okay, so if you're saying I'm not going to reach my lactate threshold, that means my sprint is down here. My sprint is here. Is that what you're saying? Remember that this x-axis is intensity. Where on this x-axis does my 100-meter sprint fall? I know we're out of time, but I just want to finish this thought.
Be more to the right.
So doesn't lactic threshold and ventilatory threshold go hand in hand?
Mm-hmm.
And you said that 10-second sprints, you're not out of breath. Ventilatory threshold means that you're out of breath, right? And so if you're not out of breath, it means you didn't reach your lactic threshold, correct?
Reason why you're not, you have the intensity, but the reason why you're not reaching your lactate threshold is because it's just 10 seconds. That y-axis is time, isn't it? No, it's blood lactate.
This is blood lactate. So if you're saying you're not reaching your lactate threshold, you're saying that the intensity is below lactate threshold, that's aerobic. We don't sprint in our aerobic system. We don't sprint underneath our lactate threshold. Our max sprint is way up here. It's our max intensity. An all-out sprint is way up here. So it's not that we're not reaching our lactate threshold. It's just that where we hit this lactate threshold, whether we hit it at 50%, 60%, 70%, is inconsequential to us up here. Okay, where this lactate threshold comes into play is maybe we're comfortable at 6 miles per hour, but uncomfortable at 7 miles per hour because 7 miles per hour is above our lactate threshold. So we'll start feeling uncomfortable here. If we're sprinting at 15 miles per hour, it doesn't make any difference that we shift into breathlessness at 7 miles per hour. It doesn't make any difference. We're way up here. So where our lactate threshold is does not affect our sprint performance. Where our lactate threshold is affects our endurance performance, because this is like the highest intensity you can be at and still be primarily aerobic, right? So lactate threshold affects endurance performance. It's one of the best predictors of endurance performance. Lactate threshold does not affect sprint performance. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is where we're going. We don't have much lecture time left, but this is what we're going to do in our next lecture is we're going to look at sprint performance, like 100-meter sprint. We're going to look at performance in glycolysis, for example, a 400-meter sprint, and we're going to look at endurance performance, for example, a 3-mile run, 5K. Okay, how does training in PCR affect each of those activities? How does training in glycolysis affect each of those activities? How does training endurance affect each of those activities? And then we're going to add resistance training. We'll talk about resistance training and talk about how resistance training affects performance in each of those categories. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is put some thought into that in between now and Wednesday. Okay, write down the different types of performance, write down the different types of training, and start to think about how each one would affect it. And you can no longer say, because we need more oxygen, or because we have to give a physiological adaptation to explain the improvement in performance. Connect. Deal? This is where we get applied and critical thinking put together. It's a little bit painful. So I want you to put some thought into that by the time when we meet on Wednesday. Go ahead.
Was it that it does affect it or it doesn't affect it?
Well, you have to determine whether this type of training will affect. Some of them will and some of them won't. So you have to have the different types of performance, ATP PCR system. You need to know what activities fit in there. Glycolysis, you need to know what activities fit in there. Aerobic, you need to know what activities fit in there. And then look at the training in each system. Will training in PCR affect your endurance performance? Will training in glycolysis affect your 100-meter sprint? Okay, compare them all and think through them all. Okay, we know the adaptations now for training each system. So try to apply that to the performance. Okay? Questions for me? And don't forget to do that glycolysis workout or some form of it today. If you don't know what it feels like, it's really hard to understand why it makes a difference. Try it. All right, I'll stay on for another minute if you guys have questions. Luis, if you want to stay on, I'd like to spend a couple minutes with you on your test. Otherwise, if you don't have any questions for me, have a great day. I will see you on Wednesday. If you want to hear this lecture again, I'm doing it tomorrow at 11 a.m. Same lecture.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
The workout that you were talking about, the 20 seconds on, 10-second rest 8 times, is that the same workout or you're doing different?
It's the same exercise.
Same
Some people, when they put together a Tabata workout, will put in different exercises, but you're missing the point. It's supposed to be the same exercise. It's supposed to be exhausting. So if you do different exercises, it makes it easier. And
Okay.
easier is not the point. I mean, it's not bad to do that. You're just not going to get as much out of it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I also have one question. So when we're working in high intensity interval training, we're primarily going to be, for the most part, in glycolysis because the rest time, number one, doesn't reflect ATP PCR recovery, and you're not going to work for only 15 seconds at a time. So it's normally glycolysis.
Right. It's
Okay.
very rare to do a workout that's just in PCR because nobody wants to rest that long. Everybody wants to be working, and because there's no reason to do it that way. It's different when we get to resistance training.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions, guys? All right.